Hello, everyone. I'm Valora Washington, CEO of the CAYL Institute. That's Community Advocates for Young Learners. And I am so happy that you joined us today to talk about this important subject of how our governments, local and state, are stepping up for our children. It is our goal every month, the first Thursday of every month, to bring you a conversation that is timely, relevant, and immediately actionable. And that's what we hope to do this month as well with our distinguished speakers. So, we are the community advocates for young children, and we're so grateful for all of the thousands of you who tune in to listen with us each month. So, we invite you to keep coming back because you are a leader for young children, and that we can all continue to be stronger advocates for young children. This year, we started out with our theme of imagination. Imagine what we can do for children. And we're really inspired by this quote from Albert Einstein. Imagination is more important than knowledge because knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. So we've asked you to join us this year in using our imagination. And this year, we've been imagining what it would be like to have an excellent 21st century kindergarten for children. We wondered about having universal childcare, universal preschool, respect for the early childhood educator. We imagined what it would be like if we joined our peer nations in having a stronger system of care and education for young children and taking that international perspective. So, thank you for joining us and imagining with us as we continue to focus on the theme this year, imagination. Later on, we're going to move to innovation. And we're going to close out the year thinking about the impact that we're having. So we're really happy that you joined us for these conversations. This month, we're going to imagine something else, and that is how can our cities and states really step up for kids, and what are they doing right now? So the cities and states in which we live, that's the grassroots of where we all do our work. And I know a lot of us think a lot about federal advocacy. And in the past year, we've done a lot of thinking about federal advocacy with the Build Back Better Act. But I do want to say that cities and states have always been very, very, very important sectors when it comes to children and families. And we want to make sure that our cities and states are working very hard for our children and families. And I want to inform you, some of you might not know that on the international scale, UNICEF has a child-friendly city initiative, and they talk about what it would mean for a community to be child-friendly. And they say that a child-friendly community by international standards is a city, town, community, or any system of government that's committed to improving the lives of children within their jurisdiction by realizing the rights of children as they're outlined in the UN Convention on the Children. And so in practice, a city or community or government agency would be listening to the voices of children. They'd be thinking about their needs, thinking about their priorities, and thinking about their rights, and that this would be an integral part of public policy, governmental decisions, and programs. So according to this international body, this is how you know if a government is being child-friendly. Are the children protected from exploitation, violence, and abuse? Do all of our children have a good start in life and grow up healthy and cared for? Do they have access to quality social services? Are they experiencing quality, inclusive, and participatory education and skills development? Are children allowed to express their opinions and influence the opinions and decisions that are going to affect them with their families? And do our levels of government participate in family, cultural, and social life of our children and families? Are our children and families able to live in a safe, secure, clean environment with access to green spaces? Do our children and families have places where they can meet friends and they have places to play and enjoy themselves? And do our children and families have a fair chance in life, regardless of their ethnic origin, income, or religion. These are the international standards which are defining a family-friendly, child-friendly community. And UNICEF has identified and recognized over 3,000 child-friendly cities in 57 countries. So this is something that they're very actively doing to certify cities as child-friendly. This initiative started globally in 1996 to protect children's rights in an increasingly decentralized world. And what we see now is that starting in 2020, there are a number of cities in the United States that are undergoing the rigorous 2-year process to be internationally recognized as family friendly. And those cities are Decatur, Georgia, Houston, Texas, Johnson City, Tennessee, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Prince George County, Maryland, and San Francisco, California. They're going through a very ambitious process to achieve this international recognition. But here in the United States, we do have organizations that have committed to working to make sure that our cities and states are working hard and well for children. And those organizations, or two of them, are the National League of Cities and the National Governors Association, both of which have offices and departments that are really focused on the needs of children and families. And there's many imaginative ways in which our cities and states are working to make our country an even better place for children and their families. So today we have two very well-informed leaders who are going to share with us information, the big picture of what's happening to make municipal and state governments step up for children. So the two leaders that we have that are going to speak today are Jordan Hynes, who's a program director for children and families at the National Governors Association, and Nancy Lim, who's the program director in the Early Childhood Success Department for the National League of Cities. So we want to welcome them and listen to them and learn from them as they teach us and celebrate with us how our governments are actually stepping up for children. Now, this webinar, as you know, is only 1 hour. So there will be, we are recording it so that people in different time zones and countries can hear it. And also closed captioning is available to support people. We really encourage you throughout this presentation to write your questions and comments in the chat, because for those of you who are frequent listeners, you know that after this webinar, we send out a follow-up email that provides you with the resources you're going to hear about today. And we also try to make those resources address the questions that you've raised. So please comment in the chat. We look forward to hearing from you. Everything we do is really based on what the CAYL Institute has learned over many years about how we can change the game for young children and make life better for our children. And we have written a book called The New Early Childhood Professional, which gives a step-by-step look at the process we use to create these kind of change. So today we want you to join us as we imagine our government stepping up for children so that we have sustainable, high-quality social services in our cities and states, universal early childhood education, abundant play spaces for our children. And we know that to achieve this, we need increased bipartisan support, families that really are supported as well, and that in all the changes that we make in policies and programs, that we're listening to the voices of families and practitioners. So join me as we start our program today. We're going to begin by hearing from Jordan Hynes, who's going to be followed by Nancy Lim. Then we'll have a group conversation where we'll try to address some of the questions that you raised with us. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Jordan. Welcome, Jordan. Join us as we think together about how our governments are stepping up for children. Welcome. We're so happy you're here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Hynes. I'm the program director for the Children and Families program at the NGA Center for Best Practices. So for those of you that aren't as familiar with NGA, I'm going to give you a little bit of history and a little bit of background about the organization. So NGA was actually chartered by Congress in 1908 and is the voice of the leaders of 55 states, territories, and commonwealths. Our nation's governors are dedicated to leading bipartisan solutions that improve citizens' lives through state government. Through NGA, governors identify priority issues and deal with matters of public policy and governance at the state, national, and global levels. This year, our organization is chaired by Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, and our vice chair is Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. In July, Governor Murphy will become the chair of the organization, and there will be a new vice chair representing a Republican state, to be determined. So there's two arms here at the National Governors Association, the NGA. There's the Center for Best Practices, and then there's the Government Relations arm. So the Government Relations arm certainly represents the governor's interests to the federal government, Congress, the executive branch. And the Center for Best Practices is the governor's facing arm. So we work with state policy leaders and other experts in fostering information sharing between states to research, development, and implement innovative solutions to public policy challenges. So for you guys that might be aware, NGA went through a little bit of a recent reorganization about 2 years ago. We really made a committed effort to turn back to our roots as a membership association. So the NGA Center for Best Practices used to have 5 divisions, all with their own little program areas underneath it. But with the reorganization, we got rid of the divisions and went to 13 different program areas to really turn towards more interdisciplinary approach. So the Children and Families program is a little bit new in that before, the early childhood education and care portfolio was in the education division, and the human services portfolio lived within the economic opportunity division. But now all these programs are freed from the silos that plague government. So we wanted to lead by example. And early childhood education and care and human services are all under one umbrella, the Children and Families portfolio. So I joined NGA in January 2021 when this portfolio was just getting underway, and it's been quite the ride so far. One more quick thing to add about NGA. So we are a membership association. We are not a think tank. As such, NGA does not have its own agenda. Our only agenda is to help each governor, reach their vision. So since I've started, this program has grown a lot, and I'm happy to share with you all the insights I've gained from working with all of our members here at NGA. So our program area has identified 5 big priority buckets that are important to governors and their staff. We've worked very closely with governors' advisors to really cultivate this list and figure out what's most important from them and what they would like most to hear from us. So the five biggest buckets are reimagining systems. That's getting out of silos, cross collaboration, utilizing technology platforms, and modernizing systems. The second bucket is whole family programs and supports. That's like wraparound services, 2-generational strategies, ensuring families get the supports they need. The third bucket is around prioritizing mental health. That covers everything from trauma-informed care to ACEs, reducing juvenile justice, looking at mental health systems, behavioral health systems. The fourth bucket is around child welfare. This is really around the foster care system. There have been a lot of improvements made within the past couple of years with Family First implementation, which is taking some great steps, but is also requires a lot for each state to undertake, a lot of changes to be made. So there's a lot of support that states are needing in that regard. And the fifth bucket is just a general, broad, expanding access to services bucket, whether that's access to affordable childcare or increasing housing capacity. These are the biggest buckets of things that governors have identified as their priorities in this space. So among these priority areas, obviously early childhood is one of the biggest priorities of them all. It cuts across a lot of these every single one of these buckets. Reimagining systems as we try and figure out how help states build out their pre-K systems, looking at whole family programs and supports, looking at what kind of 2-generational supports we can build into early childhood care and preschool. Head Start's a great example of that. Prioritizing mental health and child welfare, expanding access to services. All of these things, early childhood touches all of these things. So one of the big resources that I wanted to share with you all, and I think it will be going into the chat, that we took a survey of the state governors' state of the states. So 28 governors explicitly mentioned early childhood education care in their State of the State addresses. So, all states are struggling with this. It's a tremendous challenge, but it is a priority. Large, small, red, blue states are all leveraging the historic federal investments in ways that best meet their state's needs. So, in talking about the State of the States, one of the things that I wanted to most talk with you all today, you can go to many different think tanks, many different organizations that will talk about and go into depth and research on what is happening in each state. But one of the unique things that I think that that I wanted to share with you all is, how do governors really approach this issue? So governors are the executives for their states, but they're also politicians. And if they can't talk about an issue, it's unlikely that's going to be a priority. So as such, there's going to be a lot of differences in how governors view and discuss this priority area. And it's always going to be aligned with their values and overall vision for the state. And especially with 36 governors races this year, there are seven governors that are termed out. There's one that's not running for a re-elect, and there's 28 other open races. So there's going to be a ton of activity in November and throughout the year that you'll see through governors races. And so the biggest thing here is that the way that early childhood education and care is talked about is changing. I think in the last couple of years, we had really heard a lot about child brain development and high quality care and the return on investment, which are all incredible talking points, and they're incredibly impactful, and they really draw people's attention. But what's interesting is, I think it mostly started with the pandemic, but the way that people talk about early childhood education care, in particular in politics, is definitely shifting. And the big message today is around the economy, like everything else these days. So, we've really expanded from beyond just the human services and education spaces. And now early childhood is being talked about in conversations around economic development, workforce supports, higher education and post-secondary education, what kind of supports parents need for their kids while they're going through reskilling or going through education. And within broadband contexts, within transportation, it's being talked about wherever possible, but always around the economy. So I think those child brain development and high quality care, those are still incredibly important pieces of the conversations, but I did want to, reframe a little bit about how we're seeing our members discuss these things. So there's been a huge shift to view childcare and early childhood as a workforce support and a barrier. And you have to have that to live. You have to have these kind of supports in order to live a full and prosperous life. So the biggest framing is that parents cannot work unless they have a safe place for their children. We've seen it's been a big draw around economic mobility, using the framing of pulling early childhood education into that discussion. We've heard from a lot of different governors' offices that, certainly parents cannot work unless they have a safe place for their kids, and states don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And fortunately, there's a ton of federal dollars to be able to get there. So a couple of states that I wanted to highlight. So we've seen some big innovations. Certainly, non-traditional hours is a big issue that states deal with, that parents deal with. Care is only usually provided during the regular working hours, but a lot of parents are not always working those hours, especially during the pandemic. Different jobs are changing. So one cool thing that we've seen, Oklahoma has just started a new program called Kith Care. It's providing non-traditional childcare support to first responders and healthcare workers, so that parents can take on high-need jobs without worrying about paying thousands of dollars for care that's untraditional or doesn't fit the same model as traditional childcare models. I think they've recently gone to expand in beyond just those first responders and healthcare workers, so that all families can find friend and neighbor care that best meets their needs. It's been really difficult to be able to support those kind of models, but it's really exciting that Oklahoma has found a way to be able to provide supports to parents in the ways that they want it. So this also kind of sheds light on how a state can tailor the needs of the community, how they can tailor their childcare solutions to the needs of their community. Looking at childcare deserts and trying to address different gaps in services. So Governor Kim Reynolds in Iowa recently designated several $1 million from the state general fund for grants in rural communities to use data to assess and survey the needs of their families. She said it will provide the tools that will enable leaders and innovators to build thriving communities in all corners of the state, making Iowa an even better place to live, work, and raise families. So it's interesting here too, is that this messaging certainly is around early childhood, but it's also about the future and enabling leaders and building and working. So that common theme is there as well. And it's all about meeting people where they are. I'm seeing some couple of questions in the chat. I'm happy. I think the KITH Care program is under the Department of Human Services. So the Secretary Justin Brown, it's a very great resource in this. They have tons of resources I can connect you with in Oklahoma. So one of the biggest things again is that the messaging is really coming back to, it's all about meeting people where they are and what their needs are in their lives today. Back to the economy. So this looks different in every state though, still, even though it's a lot of the same messaging. So for South Carolina, they're investing a historic amount, $37 million to expand their 4K program for every needy family in the state. This is a model that Governor McMaster is truly excited about, talked about in his State of the State address, is thrilled to be able to expand it. And another great example of what we've seen, Oregon investing $100 million in their childcare infrastructure, raising wages, creating more professional development pathways for providers. And then a couple other state examples that I pulled that have been really exciting, even in the last week. I'm sure you guys maybe have seen Governor Lamont just announced a $150 million injection into the state's early childhood system, saying it would give every child a fair shot at life. It's the largest investment the state has ever made. And they're committed to providing enough caregivers, making sure that there's a lot of incentives and making sure that workers have enough pay to be able to enter this field and stay in the field. Worker retention is obviously very difficult. Colorado, maybe within the last week or so, 2 weeks, just announced that starting in 2023, Colorado will pay for 10 hours of preschool per week for every 4-year-old in the state, regardless of income. That's also going to be added on to the state's existing preschool program. So just really excited about that expansion. I know that's been in the works for a while. Governor Polis campaigned on this issue. So it's really exciting to be able to see that vision come to fruition. And then even next door, I know that Utah is also working on stuff, getting through the legislature, as this is the season of legislative sessions. So there's a lot of movement. And just even to the south, Governor Lujan Grisham just made a major announcement that there will be an expansion of childcare services in the state. About 30,000 new families will be covered. And then my last example, I think that I pulled, moving over, I know I talked a lot about the West, but moving over to the South, Governor Ivey just announced that she's adding 96 early childhood classrooms to her state. And I think that's a $22.5 million investment this year. So that's kind of a broad strokes look. I know I gave a couple of examples and really talked about how different, how the governors are talking about this, but I look forward to the opportunity to discuss with you all about, discuss more some of these questions in depth and discuss have a conversation with you all during the question and answer session. So wanted to turn it over to Nancy Lim now from the National League of Cities. Nancy.
Great. Thank you, Jordan. Loved hearing about the commitment of governors to children and families. The National League of Cities. I'm Nancy Lim. I am a program director with the Early Childhood Success team at the National League of Cities. And like the National Governors Association, the National League of Cities is a nonpartisan entity, and we represent municipalities, cities, towns, and villages. So 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the United States. And we represent them. And similar to the National Governors Association, we have a federal advocacy arm where we're lifting up to the federal government what matters most to cities. And what matters most is thriving communities. And we also have research where we look at best practices and what's happening within cities. And I work within a special institute called the Institute for Youth Education and Families, which is solely committed to helping and working alongside city leaders to build thriving communities. Our institute centers values of racial equity, economic empowerment, high quality education, equal justice, and strong health outcomes, irrespective of zip code. So when we talk about thriving communities, we talk about communities that work for the people that live there. And within the Early Childhood Success team, we're working so that every city, town, and village, it has healthy babies, happy families, and all children are thriving by 3, ready at 5, and on their way at 8. So before we get into, why local government, why work with them, I want you to take a minute, even maybe close your eyes and think about either where you live now or where you grew up and what made your city or town a great place to be a child. What did you love about it? I grew up in a small town in Western New York, and it was great because we had a lot of open fields and we knew everybody. And I could walk into the grocery store, and back then there were nickel candies. We won't talk about how old I am. And it was great, and we could ride our bikes, and that's what I loved about our town. You might want to think about what did you love about your town or city and put it into the chat. So at National League of Cities, we say it takes, we all have heard this phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. At National League of Cities, we say it takes cities, towns, and villages because we know it's a team sport, right? Any parent, it's a lot. I have 2 kids. It's a lot to raise a child, have a job, all of that. And we know city leaders are invested in it. Our towns are built for our people. Even though sometimes the economy and that language can become more prevalent, they're built for us and we build them. We elect our city officials so that we can together decide where do we put our resources and our opportunities. And what matters most to city leaders and what matters to families are thriving economy. We all want to work and be paid well for it and be able to have the opportunities we need. We all want to live in a thriving neighborhood where we feel safe and we have hope and there are opportunities. We all want quality services available to us when and where they're needed. And we see many city leaders across the country as champions for early childhood. And just like us and families, city leaders are charged with balancing and budgeting for all the things the city does, those essential services, and then the things they'd like to do, different priorities. And they also have to save for surprises, just like we do, emergency funds, because life happens, right? COVID happened, and they had to shift a lot of their dollars over to frontline services, PPE, and that has, like it had impact on our personal budgets, it had impact on city budgets. And cities are not one focused issues, just like a family is not one focused. I love my kids. I want to do everything I can for them, but I also have to pay my mortgage. I have to make sure my house is running. I'm paying attention to my job and my career. My car is running and all of that. City leaders are balancing that physical infrastructure, human infrastructure, and core services. So just like National Governors Association, National League of Cities does a state of cities report instead of a state of states report. We do this in June. In the resources, you're going to get a sneak peek blog and a link to the June report. But we know what's happened recently: COVID, the Great Recession, and now we're in the Great Resignation. And these have impacts on not only our families, but our cities, counties, and states. So a sneak peek, the top three tend to always be infrastructure, public safety, and economic development. That's where it is right now. But, you know, the top 10, most are there, but some come and go, or where they are change. Human services, health and human services, education, always within that. The changing demographics, housing, energy, data, budgets are all of concern for city leaders. Most cities, one thing to know, are on a fiscal year. They're not on a calendar year like our families are. Typically, it's July to June, although it can be, I've seen all different. And the budget process is long. Their budget process is not as nimble as maybe your home budget process. So understanding where the budget process is, connecting with your city leaders if you want programs or policies funded, to get into that rhythm with them so that they can plan that out with them. Cities are dealing with a lot of lost revenue and increases expenses related to COVID. The recovery funding is definitely, like the states, very welcome and appreciated from the federal government. The CARES Act went to a lot of bigger cities. However, the state and local fiscal recovery funds that came with ARPA found every city and county across the country getting direct dollars. And NLC, we're in those conversations with the White House and Congress in making sure that every city, town, and village got direct funding. There's guidance on that funding, and the guidance that's really helping with families is, you know, responding to the public health emergency and also the economic harm and disproportionate income that happened. I'm going to give some examples of how cities are using some of that funding and things. The other thing that we do is look at the fiscal conditions report. That report comes out in October. So you'll get the two, the state of the cities and the fiscal condition report. So what's the role of local government in early childhood success? A lot of times people say, oh, that's just family. Okay, maybe the schools, if the city runs the school district, and it's really in the not-for-profits. But if you think about it, cities are champions for early childhood. Think about how many direct and indirect ways cities are interacting. Just, is your garbage being removed? Where are the grocery stores? What's the zoning for parks and open space, buildings? And can you put childcare facilities in certain areas, in commercial districts and residential districts? What is the zoning if you want to have family childcare? Can you do that? So we see that there's a lot of champions, right? Early childhood success and standing up for kids as a team sport. It takes your government entities, cities, counties, and state and federal government. It takes your community-based organizations and stakeholders and providers. It takes local funders, and it takes families, right? We're all in this together. So the levers specific to local government, I group them in kind of policies, programs, and practices. For policies, how can we use our codes, ordinances, and regulations and city government support through financing to support early childhood success? Programming, there's the essential services that touch families, whether directly or indirectly, but then many cities have direct services that they provide specific to families. Lots of cities, and lots of cities are providing childcare, running pre-K programs, the supports in connecting children to parks and rec and different programmings, the libraries. All of these are helpful in standing up for families. And then there's the practices, using the bully pulpit, the city leader being able to use that to convene, build awareness, and to build shared, to call for shared goals and working together across the community and across all these entities for success. So let's get into some examples. So from a Bully Pulpit, we talked about, just using your voice and using your influence. From a policy standpoint, many city leaders are actually building departments of early learning, having children's commissions, their agendas are including children and families and early childhood success, pre-K slots. And they're also calling for citywide agendas so that they can align across communities and actually work more efficiently and effectively with all their partners. Just last week, April 30th, New Orleans passed a new property tax that's going to directly fund early childhood programming, and it includes childcare seats for our infants and toddlers for low-income families. And we know those are the most expensive seats, and those are the most difficult to find. Recently, Denver and Louisville both changed zoning. So Denver found that they were having trouble in an area where the zoning regarding sprinklers for family childcare, because it was a business, they were supposed to have commercial sprinklers, but that was cost prohibitive for families that wanted to have family childcare. And they worked through the zoning and coding to, yes, keep families and make sure that there were adequate fire safety, but to change the regulation so that it was affordable and they could find affordable solution so that there could be more family childcare. And same with Louisville, they had where childcare, family childcare was, you couldn't put them in certain areas, residential areas, and they changed the zoning so that they could create more childcare seats, and zoning wasn't prohibitive. So if you think about increasing access, supporting the workforce as two major areas that cities are working to help, Philadelphia, Dayton, San Antonio, they all are either contracting with providers to provide more seats and to supplement childcare, or San Antonio pre-K for SA, and then in Cleveland, pre for CLE, are actually providing direct childcare in pre-K. Gothenburg and Wood River. So for those of you like, okay, those are big cities, but Gothenburg and Wood River, I think Gothenburg, Nebraska, 5,000, Wood River, maybe 3,000. They're working with their community. These are small governments, but they're working with their community because they need capacity for childcare. In Gothenburg, they're going to build a new center, or they're building, and they raised funding to do that. That's going to be used as a community center. It's multi-use. It's going to have childcare during the day. It's open to the region, that you could use it for weddings or whatever. It's a community hall. They're looking at using that extra revenue to provide stipends to help families with childcare. And with the ARPA dollars, they're going to be building out the infrastructure, the water and sewer lines to that facility. And it's a really great cross-community effort where the mayor has really stepped up and helped with that. Same with Wood River. They had a nursing home that shut down after the floods a couple of years ago, and they've been renovating that space so that it's a community hub. It will provide direct services as well as wraparound services for families. St. Paul, Minnesota has children's savings account, College Bound St. Paul. So where you start, they start funding savings accounts for families at birth. And then Help Me Grow in North Texas and Tarrant County. That's a great partnership between the city of Fort Worth and Tarrant County. Supporting the workforce, many cities, right, that what Jordan talked about, that economic impact of childcare. And we know childcare is infrastructure, and early childhood success is infrastructure. And we use this framing a lot because without childcare, like Jordan said, families can't get to work. And without children developing strongly, you're not going to have your future workforce, right? We're building the future. And many city leaders see this as legacy building a future for the next, and laying the groundwork on which others will be successful. Minneapolis is providing FFN, right? There's not one type of childcare. There's many different, and families should have what they have access to. So there's lots of supports for family childcare. Grand Rapids and Chattanooga are also establishing shared services alliances and considering how to provide childcare providers with benefits through shared services. In Orlando, Florida, they do small business supports, helping providers with the business acumen of having, and then improving quality. Jacksonville, Florida, it started out as a mayor's book club. And it progressed to where they now do coaching of childcare workers as a way of increasing quality so that every child within Jacksonville has access to high quality care. And so, yay, shout out to Jacksonville. And yes, they're a great partner of ours. I'm seeing all these chats. I want to go back. I can't wait for the Q&A to see lots of cities looking at recovery plans and how they can use it. There is a tracker. Actually, I forgot to put that in, Dr. Washington. I'm going to put it in so you can send out our tracker of what's happening and what cities are doing. But there's a case study in there too. You'll get all of those resources so you can really dig in. Please feel free to reach out to me. I do want to say your city leaders are your city leaders. Reach out to them. There's a resource in there about how know your city's governance structure and how the city is organized. That'll be really helpful. Remember, they want thriving cities just like you do. Become familiar with their plans and priorities and look for the win-win. Where is their overlap? What could you give them to achieve their goals? What could you get from them to achieve their goals? And link arms and work together and see how they're already working within community and bringing community together. And when you're reaching out and when you're working together, really consider the messenger. Who's the right person who can give the message? I know, right? I have teenagers right now. So right? Just like me talking with them, I can say something and no, they're not going to listen as well, but Jordan could come and talk to them or Dr. Washington, and they'd be like, oh, wow, that's a great idea. So consider your messenger when you're connecting with your city leaders, just like you do a partner. And remember, these are partnerships with your city leaders. Start early before you have an ask. Develop those relationships, develop that trust and that win-win attitude together, and you're going to be off to success. I can't wait for our group discussion. Looking forward to it. Dr. Washington, Jordan, so excited to have our discussion in the Q&A later. And I could just talk forever. So we got to bring you all back because there's just so much to say on the topics.
It is. Jordan, if you want to join us, I'm really excited to hear what states and cities are doing. And I'm also excited to hear that it is from smallest little townships to our really bigger cities and so forth. And I really am really interested in a number of things. There's a lot of things that have come up in the chat. I think that in the early childhood education community, if I could speak for our community, we've noticed that childcare has been tied a lot to the economic development of cities and towns and states. And that is really, really important because we know that people need us. We are the workforce behind the workforce, as people say. We also want people to remember in their cities and states, our governors and our municipal leaders, that we are professionals who are really focused on child development and the care and education of children. That yes, we are a very strong economic resource, and I know how messaging changes through the times, but we do want cities and states to remember that we are professionals concerned about the well-being of children and families. So I know the messaging has changed. I'm wondering, Nancy, if you're seeing the kind of change in what municipalities are responding to in the same way that Jordan has. And I think it's probably a yes answer based on what you said.
Yeah, I think, there is the appreciation for the professionalism and the true work that providers do, and there's an appreciation. There's also an appreciation for the economic impact it has on the city, right? And so it's not it's a yes and, I want to say, right? It's a yes and. These are talented professionals that are providing us a service and building our future. And they provide an economic driver for our communities, right? So it's not one or the other. And when you're making difficult financial decisions, right? You have your budget, you got to make difficult financial decisions. Understanding the return on investment that early childhood success and these programs do is helpful in making the case for how do we support this, right? Because the program, right? I think it's what one a 13% return on investment is the Heckman report, right? If I'm getting 13% investment return on my investment, that's much better than any savings account that's out there right now, even with the rate hike that went up. So yes, it's a yes and.
Absolutely. Jordan, I was really happy to hear that more than half of the governors mentioned early childhood in their State of the State addresses. This is surely a massive change from when I started my career. It's very encouraging. In what way did they mention early childhood education? Did you notice they mentioned early childhood education? Were there any particular themes that they were mentioning about it? You mentioned some of them are giving some pay supplements to the workforce, the economic issues and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. I actually have my little chart right here, my cheat sheet chart right here.
Great.
So we heard a lot about, budget proposals. I mean, certainly there was obviously a ton of federal money, so that states have at their disposal. So a lot of different proposals for provider pay rate increases. Let's see, lots of mentions of increasing childcare slots, new childcare seats. A lot, yeah. I would say mostly they talked about their investments that they're looking to make ahead of the legislative sessions. But a lot of them also talked about, as I said, they framed it as like a workforce support system. And even, I mean, I know you specifically asked about the State of the State addresses, but even within, conversations about workforce development, you hear about, we need to bring, this has caused a lot of mothers to leave the workforce, a lot of parents to have to make tough decisions and have to drop out of the workforce. So there's that. I think that actually came up in some of the State of the State addresses. I want to say Governor Lamont from Connecticut mentioned that. Let's see. Mostly it's tied to getting more care options for families is how they expressly talked about early childhood education.
Well, I have to tell you, from looking at the chat and also from what I know about our field, we're so encouraged to see how the governors and the municipalities are really paying attention to families' need for childcare, for early childhood education, and for support for the workforce. This is extremely encouraging news to us. Just the fact that each of these organizations have offices and staff like you that are specifically focused on these issues is wonderful, great news for us. And so really glad to hear about that. What are mayors saying, Nancy, when they talk about it? Is it still along the same line? I mean, we were hearing really great examples of how various municipalities are investing in the workforce and in childcare.
Yeah, I think, yes, they're investing in the workforce and childcare, and they're saying that they're also seeing it holistically, right? And that it's not just about important, but they're also seeing, how do you keep families whole? Mental health services, how, understanding childcare providers as first responders, but also understanding the choices and the conditions. Some families, are you able to meet your basic needs? What does that look like within my community? Where are they? How are families? And from neighborhood to neighborhood, what do they need? And how are the different services connected? How are we connecting to early intervention and screenings to ensure that children are getting and families are getting the services that they need to thrive from an early? And how are we helping to make warm handoffs and easy touch points? So you'll see like libraries really becoming resources of information, not just about what the government can do, but what can be done around the community, right? Because it does take that village. And so they are talking about it in a more holistic manner, which is really exciting.
So I'm wondering if you can give us some advice as insiders working with governors and mayors and states and municipalities. Can you give us some advice about how we can be stronger, more effective advocates in working with cities and states? How do we approach our leaders? How do we share the message? How do we best thank them for the efforts they're already giving? What advice and little mentoring can you offer to us?
Happy to take a first stab at this. So, and before I came to NGA, I worked on Capitol Hill for 10 years working on early education policy. And this is a question that I always ask our governor's offices, the governor's policy advisors. What is the bright, shiny object for your boss? I once had a member of Congress that I worked for that could only look at things through a national security lens. So if I wanted to get his attention on something, I had to frame it in as a national, education is a national security issue because we need to be able to compete with China, we need to be able to compete with Russia, and then he'd be like, oh, okay, I'm in. So if you can find that bright, shiny object of what values that governor holds very dear and frame it into those kind of terms, I think that's always going to be able to get their attention very quickly because it's already framed and prepped into the mindset that they're looking at things. So I mentioned a lot of governors have really loved talking about childcare, early childhood education as a workforce support or as important to be able to drive the economy. And so you just kind of have to find that piece, or for some people, it might be parental rights. Be able to choose your childcare provider, be able to choose the best education, have these opportunities available to you. That might be another one. Or it could also just be child development, but you really have to figure out who your audience is and what's their bright, shiny object.
And I want to hear an answer from Nancy, but while you're talking, Jordan, what about the messenger? Who do you think are the best messengers to deliver this? So we're fully capable of doing this, but as you're pointing out, the message is important. What about the messenger?
Who would be the messenger to talk to the governor? I think they do they do respond to their constituents. They have to be responsive to them. They're the ones that, and like I said, there's 32 governor's races this year. So, 36 governor's races. So they are listening and they are, their folks are tied to the polls. They will be listening to what people are saying. So I think this is a very powerful time to be an advocate.
Absolutely. With 36 governors' races, it's a really good time to get involved as they're setting their platforms to help them put this on their platforms. I love that it's a bipartisan issue now as well. Nancy, your response.
Yeah, so lots of transitions, right, with the mayors, council members, school board members. Sometimes the city runs right, depending on how the school is structured. So lots of different transitions. The same, I think get to understand your city's governance structures, how the rules are made, right? You can be a strong mayor or a weak mayor, and that's not a personal trait. That depends on whether they have administrative authority or not. Or are they the head of the council, or do they actually make the executive decisions? There can be a mayoral council, and your city manager may actually have a lot of influence and power, and they're an employed person, not an elected person. So understand the structure and where the influence and the authority lie. And then there's also the authority that's not official, of where authority lies within your community, right? Like who has the ear of council, who has the ear of your mayor and your city manager. But if you understand the city governance structures, how it's organized to get the work done, that's a great place to start. And like what Jordan said, get familiar with their plans and priorities. What are the things that are important to them? And then look for the win-win between them. I've always said I can make early childhood support any issue, right? And so walk through how early childhood supports any issue that they're done. That's looking for that win-win. And consider not just when you go in for an ask of what you want from them, but how can you help them with their priorities? So here's the win-win. The messenger, it really kind of depends. I think like governors, elected officials love to talk to their constituency, right? They're there, they're servant leaders. They're there to serve their community, and you're their community. So reach out. I haven't met a city official that hasn't said, oh, I don't want to talk to my constituency. They all want to talk to everybody. And their doors are open. So reach out. I think when there's certain issues, sometimes if having partners with you, like, do you have some business leaders, or do it depends on the issue, where it might be good to have a multi-sector approach to communicating with them. But I wouldn't have any hesitancy in reaching out.
Yeah. One of the things at the CAYL Institute, as you know, runs fellowship programs, and I think people are often amazed at how easy it is to personally one-on-one communicate with our elected officials. I think a lot of times people think that's a scary, difficult, distant process. But even if you're in some of the larger cities, it's easier than you think to really communicate. I want to encourage everybody to remember that we do have a question and answer. There will be a link in the chat, because this is Zoom webinar. You have to make a special link and click that link to join the question answer period with Jordan and Nancy. So I want to encourage you to look in the chat, and at 5 o'clock exactly, we're going to go into that question answer period. As we wrap up, Jordan and Nancy, do you have any last comments that you'd like to make, or reflections before we move into the question answer period?
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this discussion, and all of the participants in that. Feel free. You're going to get my email. Feel free to reach out. Reach out to National League of Cities. We're here. If it's on a different topic, happy to connect you with any of my colleagues. And look at your city officials as partners in our work to really build a strong future and build strong kids and families. So thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. So I want to thank all of you for joining this part of our program. And thank you all. We're going to move on and close out and move on to the question answer period. So I think what we're hearing from our experts here is the importance of voicing what we want to see happen. I think I'm going to use the word vote. You just heard there's 36 governors elections coming up. We need to vote, but even before voting, we need to work with them as they're setting their agenda and moving forward. And also we can volunteer to work within our cities and states as volunteers. So we're going to go in the question answer session, but I also want to invite you to come to our next webinar, which is going to be about making space for play. We're going to move into some anti-bias approaches that we can actually use with our children and families, how we honor their voices and inspire joy for all children. That's what's coming up next in the CAYL webinar series. And I want to thank you all for joining us in this conversation today about our cities and states. Welcome you to really join the question answer period. Thank you. And I am going to go into the question answer period right now. Hope to see you there. Bye-bye.